Rahul Gandhi has promised a minimum income guarantee scheme if his party is voted to power in the upcoming general elections. The announcement made during a rally in Chhattisgarh comes in the same week that the union government is expected to present its last budget, an interim one. A budget in which a direct transfer scheme for farmers was also expected to be announced. So how big an impact politically could this promise have, and how would a minimum income scheme actually work? To talk on this, I'm joined today by Praveen Chakravarty, who's the head of the Congress Data Analytical Cell, who will hopefully give us more details on the scheme. I'm also joined by Aditi Phadnis, political editor of the Business Standard, and political commentator Madhavan Narayanan. We will talk a little bit on the political impact of the scheme. But before we start all of this, let's just play out a clip of what Rahul Gandhi said in that rally in Chhattisgarh today.
आपने देखा, चाहे वो किसान का कर्जा माफ हो, चाहे वो जमीन वापस देने की बात हो, चाहे वो सही दाम देने की बात हो, वो मैं पूरा करके दिखाता हूं। और अब कांग्रेस पार्टी ने निर्णय ले लिया है कि हम एक ऐतिहासिक, दुनिया में पहली बार कांग्रेस पार्टी एक निर्णय लेने जा रही है। कांग्रेस पार्टी ने मन बना लिया है कि 2019 चुनाव जीतने के एकदम बाद, जैसे हमने, नहीं अभी ताली मत बजाओ, आपने सुना नहीं अभी, जब सुनोगे हिल जाओगे, ऐसी बात मैं करने जा रहा हूं। हमने निर्णय ले लिया है कि हिंदुस्तान के हर गरीब व्यक्ति को 2019 के बाद कांग्रेस पार्टी वाली सरकार गारंटी करके न्यूनतम आमदनी देने जा रही है। इसका मतलब मिनिमम इनकम गारंटी, मतलब हिंदुस्तान के हर गरीब व्यक्ति के बैंक अकाउंट में कम से कम न्यूनतम आमदनी हिंदुस्तान की सरकार देने जा रही है। मतलब हिंदुस्तान में ना कोई भूखा रहेगा, ना कोई गरीब रहेगा।
All right, big promise coming just a couple of months before the country goes to vote in the same week as the budget. Most interesting first to find out what exactly is in this scheme, and one of the key people in the Congress party working on it is Praveen Chakravarty. Praveen, why don't you start by giving us a sense of what Rahul Gandhi means when he says minimum income scheme? Who is it for? Is it like the universal basic income?
Sure. I think, the key phrase here is minimum income guarantee. And what this actually means is that unlike the universal basic income that most economists talk about, this is not universal, neither is it a basic minimum income for everybody. What it means is that it's actually a progressive scheme where there would be a certain threshold for minimum income that would be decided and fixed, and those that fall below that threshold at varying degrees will be compensated with income transfers to ensure that there is a basic minimum income support for every poor household in the country. So this is for the poor households, and we could always indulge in a discussion on what poor households mean, what percentage of households they are, and all of that. And all of those details will be announced and revealed in the manifesto that will be announced very shortly. But this has been a topic that we've been discussing and engaging with various stakeholders, including economists from all over the world.
One minute, Praveen. When you say
a certain scheme,
sure. When you say progressive minimum income scheme, can you explain that in a bit more detail? For example, are you saying that different households would get different amounts, and of course these are going to be directly transferred as is mentioned in the Congress statement as well?
Correct. See, like I said, the details, all of the details would be announced in the manifesto. All I'm pointing out to this is a structural framework on how we are thinking about this. right? So the universal basic income, since you refer to it, as most people understand, is A, it is universal, which means everybody gets it, including the richest 1%, and B, it's a standard amount for everybody. Now, we will adapt that to the conditions here, which is, so number one, it's not universal. It will be aimed at only the poor households. And B, it will not be the same amount for everybody. It will depend on how poor each household is. So in that sense, it is progressive in nature.
Progressive in respect to what? Is there a standard figure which you have in mind from where the amount which will be transferred to each household will be derived?
Yes, see, there are various frameworks, economic frameworks that we're thinking about, including the average per capita income, what's the minimum standard of living, what about inflation, index to inflation, all of that. But let us assume that X amount of rupees per year is the threshold minimum income that is needed for every Indian household in this country. Let's assume my income is just 50% of that, and your income is 70% of that. Then the gap between that minimum income is different for both of us. So the income guarantee scheme would ensure that all of us are at the basic minimum income threshold.
And how will you determine who should be the recipient for this? So will this be determined based on annual income? Is there a ballpark sort of idea? Because I know, Praveen, you are a person who works with statistics. Is there an idea you have in mind on what percentage of the population you're covering when you're saying this is for the poor? How many people is this?
Yes, so like I said, again, all of those details will be worked out. But see, it's important to think about this in terms of, I think your larger question is how would we know or how would we target? And I think it's a very valid question. What we do know is that we today have enough data and information about households in the country, but through which we can make objective decisions. I'll just give you a simple example. Just coincidentally today, the former Chief Economic Advisor of India, Dr. Arvind Subramaniam, and two other co-authors have published a piece in the Business Standard that actually talks about, that gives various scenarios of how this could work. And they've also highlighted how using the SECC, the socioeconomic census data, one could actually come and arrive at and target households based on income levels. That is one framework, but I'm just citing that as an example. So today it is possible to be able to target and identify households, and it's much easier today than it was even say 5 years ago or 10 years ago.
Okay. The other big question, Praveen, is as a country, as an economy, can India afford a scheme like this? Would it be looked as a huge socialist scheme? And of course, promises are made before an election. But we have to see if they are implementable. And do you think they are implementable?
No. I think we should stay away from the labels of isms, socialism and capitalism and all of that. This is an economic idea that has been widely discussed and debated all over the world, including in India over the last 2 years. The Chief Economic Advisor then in 2017, Dr. Arvind Subramaniam, had an entire chapter on this in the Economic Survey. So it's not an idea that is, that could be labeled as one of the isms. What it means is that it recognizes some very fundamental harsh truths about today's society. A, income inequality is widening at an alarming rate. B, minimum income support, incomes have become very, very volatile for people. C, economic growth does not necessarily mean job-full growth, which means there are income-less growth for people. D, returns to capital are much higher than returns to labor, as we call it in economics. Hence, all of these are well-recognized facts in today's world across by all economists. So it's not some electoral promise or whatever you may call it. There's been a lot of thought behind this, and I think one of the contexts in which the announcement was made today was the Congress President was in Chhattisgarh for giving out the loan waiver certificates, and it's a natural progression because all of you would constantly ask, what after loan waiver? Loan waiver is just a balm, a soothing balm. So he actually thought it was prudent to actually make this announcement today, which is a natural next step to how we're going to think about this idea of no Indian left behind, borrowing from Barack Obama's No Child Left Behind.
Okay. Praveen, please stay on with me. I also have, of course, on the panel today, Aditi Phadnis and Madhavan Narayanan. And I want to invite them to come in with any more details or questions we need before we go into the political, impact of this. Aditi, do you want to go first? Any more details we need to know? Though, of course, Praveen says that most of it will be out in the manifesto. But anything else you want to throw at him?
Well, there are two things which are puzzling me. Firstly, what happens to the subsidies which are already given to people below a certain threshold? The idea of universal basic income was that the subsidies will be reworked in a way that they will be kind of subsumed by the universal basic income. And so, I don't know what's going to happen to that. Secondly, now the Congress has a number of, is in part in a number of states in India. And is there any proposal to try this on a pilot basis in some states or in some areas of some states so that we can see whether it actually works? Because in the absence of full rollout of Aadhaar, it may be a little difficult to target people to whom you have to give this. So I'm really not sure how it's going to work. And of course, the third thing is Business Standard has all the most brilliant ideas. So thank you for quoting Business Standard.
Okay, that's not really a question, but yeah, Praveen, did you hear those two questions? And I think key ones. What happens to the subsidies, and will you roll these out as pilot projects?
No, I'm sorry, I didn't.
Yeah, the first one is what happens to the subsidies? Does this minimum income guarantee scheme subsume, existing subsidies? And secondly, would you start implementing this as a pilot project in the states where the Congress is in power to let us see how it works?
Yeah, like I said, the details will be in the manifesto, but I think Aditi Phadnis' larger question is how would this be funded? So this would be funded in a combination of things. We've thought through this. We've thought through a combination of increased revenues, rationalization of expenditure, as well as, I think, don't forget, just income in the hands of the poor automatically also leads to a consumption boost to the economy. So there is a proper economic framework through which we can think about this and which we have. So all of the details in terms of how this would be funded would be in the manifesto. The second question about doing a pilot, I think a pilot at this point, the manifesto is expected to be announced in the next few days or weeks. So I'm not so sure we would wait for a pilot in any of the states before we actually announce, because I don't believe we have that time.
Okay. Madhavan, do you want to come in with any questions for Praveen before we move ahead?
Yeah, actually, it's quite clear from Praveen Chakravarty's statements that he's not likely to come out with more details. But let me elaborate a bit on what Aditi said. When we talk subsidies, we already have certain schemes in place, including the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme, the MNREGA. And we also have the PDS, the Public Distribution System. And putting two and two together, your question about subsuming subsidies and Praveen's own statement about rationalization of expenditure, I would logically expect the PDS and the MNREGA kind of schemes to be folded into the fiscal framework of expenditure associated with the minimum support for income. So I would be tempted to ask Praveen if it is indeed true, because PDS usually means you're subsidizing expenditure, and minimum income means you're putting money in the hands of people. Is it necessary to have both, or is it more the icing on the cake? These are questions that require answer. I'm not very sure Praveen has the answers yet, or even if he does, whether he'll share it. I'd be delighted to hear more on that. What happens to MNREGA, what happens to PDS, and also we need to tie it all up to the income support for farmers. I'll reserve my political comments at this point. I'm sure we'll have space down the line in the discussion.
Yes, Praveen. With very valid questions, because every version of these kind of schemes come with a paring down of subsidies. It just seems a natural progression.
Sure. I do first want to make it clear that, the chairman of the manifesto committee and the person who I'm working with very closely on this is the former finance minister, Mr. P. Chidambaram. So I think it is reasonable to assume that Mr. Chidambaram knows a little bit about India's finances and the schemes and how we need to fund this and keep fiscal prudence in check. I think we also need to think about this in a much more nuanced manner. I think it is not just simply as about we dropping one and bringing in a new one and all of those. I think first this is income support, then there is cash versus kind types of schemes, then you have to account for transition, you have to account for a variety of such things. So I think it is important to go through the nuance, and I can assure all of you at this point in time that all these details are being thought through and worked upon by some of the finest experts in the country.
Praveen, do we have a figure of how much it would cost the economy? Is there any kind of figure you can share with us as a percentage of GDP or any estimate so far?
No, okay. I can't share anything with you right now. But see, I think I would urge you to read Dr. Arvind Subramanian's piece just today, about what he calls a quasi-universal income. So there are various scenarios there. Should it be 0.5% of GDP? Should it be 1% of GDP? Should it be 1.5% of GDP? Should it be 2% of GDP? He actually assigns different scenarios. So I think those are all kind of valuable inputs into our thought process before we finalize and settle on something. You would appreciate that we have to first kind of settle on how many households are we targeting, what is the amount, where can we fund it, keeping fiscal prudence in check, and that will determine a lot of the questions about what would it mean as a percentage of GDP.
No, I have read that piece, and he talks about an annual transfer of 18,000 rupees a year, which to 75% of the rural population, which would cost about 2.64 lakh crore rupees. But then again, he's talking about farmers. When you talk about an income guarantee scheme for the poor, you're going beyond rural areas, you're going to urban areas as well. But anyway, let me come to the politics of it. And Mr. Narayanan, I think we should get into that, because I think it's no coincidence that this comes in the same week as the budget is expected to be announced. People were saying that there would be some sort of farm transfer scheme announced in the budget. Has Rahul Gandhi timed this to sort of steal the thunder?
Absolutely. I'm imagining it like a poker game in which everybody is daring the other to show. It's political poker at its best or worst, depending on which way you look at it. There's a nice term for it called competitive populism. That's what we are witnessing right now, because let's step back a bit. What we are witnessing now is a strange, delightful play of events in which Dr. Arvind Subramanian, who until a few weeks ago was an advisor to the NDA, is being quoted by Congress as some kind of a blueprint maker for its own pre-election thunder. So that is going to be an irony wrapped in a delicious enigma. That joke apart, there are issues about farmers. It's quite clear that following the loan waiver in Madhya Pradesh and other states, which helped Congress come back to power in the states, on the one hand, the BJP doesn't like the idea of supporting loan waiver, but on the other hand knows that it has to win back the farmers as a constituency. So they are trying to steal a leaf or two from Telangana or Odisha, where the chief ministers have implemented income support scheme for farmers. And what the Congress is doing at the center, based on what Rahul Gandhi said today, is to take what would be an income support scheme for farmers and also design it in such a way that even landless laborers, who are traditionally Congress supporters or expected Congress constituency in terms of Dalits, are also covered by some kind of an income support scheme. So MNREGA was already there to mainly help landless laborers, especially in drought-prone areas. And that is being sort of recycled or repackaged or reoriented and wedded with Mr. Chidambaram's old idea of financial inclusion, which was sought to be appropriated by Mr. Modi for the past 5 years. So what we are seeing here is a ping pong of ideas in which both the BJP and the Congress, maybe in the UPA and the NDA, are sort of stealing ideas from each other. And if I may be allowed a bit of humor, it's like taking somebody else's hand grenade, taking off the pin and throwing it right back at him. And that's what is happening right now. And it's a game of upping the ante. The fiscal costs are significant. But the good news is that India's fiscal deficit has never looked so good in spite of having a huge NPA problem in the banking system. So this is not a bad time to go for the shorts. It's a bit like cricket in which you have only 4 overs to go, but you have 4 wickets in hand, so might as well play your shots.
Aditi, what do you make of this promise? And of course, more details will come through. Remember, you also have to bring these details into the campaign. With Praveen, we're having, a slightly more technical discussion here. But when you take this idea as a pre-poll idea, you have to make it more appealing and attractive. Do you think that this is the game changer it's being made out to be? And will we quickly see some kind of a rejoinder from the BJP?
Well, not very clearly, so I'm just going to say what I think is going to happen to this idea. Yeah, it's a great idea. Something like the kind of campaign that the Congress mounted in 2004, which was kind of a riposte to India Shining. So as politics go, that whole thing about what will happen to us, the poor, the lonely, the dispossessed, the disadvantaged, making that the center of the campaign. And frankly, all the speeches that Prime Minister Narendra Modi has made, I cannot recall a single one where he has not used the word poor at least once. So I think this proposal of the Congress President will tell people that the ruling government and the ruling party is just talking about stuff and we are actually going out there and doing it. But then the problem with that is that they have to do it. They have to do it somewhere. We have to see how this works out and how it can be demonstrated. And now that the Congress is in power in so many places, well, it has to try it out somewhere.
Yeah, that's an important point, Praveen, because that 15 lakh in every account promise sort of haunted this government for all of its term. And today you've had a senior minister from the BJP talking about how voters treat politicians who don't come true on their promises. The Congress has to ensure it's not in that category.
Okay, so what's the question?
So the question is, how will you ensure that you actually follow through? If you don't come to power in 2019, will you implement this in the states where you are governing?
No, see, I mean, again, I want to reiterate, this is an idea that has been thought through and has been announced by the Congress President. So we're obviously extremely serious about this. This was not one of those election promises that I think the BJP President himself called, I forget that Hindi term, I think Jumla or something, that he had used for that 15 lakh promise. So it's certainly not that. And I'm sitting here and giving you the framework and the process by which we're thinking through this. I think we have to step back and realize, what does this tell us? This is a recognition of the fact that perhaps what is needed the most after May 2019 for this country is healing of the economy and healing of society, for sure. But healing of the economy. Economic issues are paramount. The 2019 election will be about jobs, or lack of it, and it will be about rural distress, and it will be about lack of income growth. And that is really why we've spent a lot of time working through an idea and the details of it, and we chose to announce it today.
All right, we'll wait for more details, though, of course, in the thick of election campaigning, the details might not be the most important when it comes to pushing through a political idea. I'll just end by asking both Aditi and Madhavan whether they think this is truly a game changer. Aditi, you think it'll make all the difference?
Yeah, sorry, is that a question for me?
Yes, Aditi.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a very important idea, but the proof of its eating is in the proof of the pudding is in its eating. So we need to see how it is rolled out. I think it would be good if it were to be rolled out as a pilot project in a small area, so that we can see its transformative.
I don't know if any political party would risk a pilot project not working. Let's be honest. This is a political announcement at this point. It's a promise. Mr. Narayanan, do you think this is going to make all the difference?
Yes, in a big way, because please remember there is Ayushman Bharat already in the picture, which was announced last year by Mr. Modi. And a farm income support scheme in some form or the other is going to be announced in the budget this week, as well as the manifesto of the BJP. So the Congress needs badly some trump card to play, and this could be it. Please understand that the Modi government has also implemented a 10% job quota for the economically weaker sections. We will not go into the details of implementation at this point, but we all need talking points and slogan points and rhetoric. And right now, Congress has managed to get some, it's not really resting the initiative, but it's certainly got ammunition enough to play the game in the next few months, so it's going to be very interesting.
All right, we'll wait and see how this all pans out. All the details as much as are available on this minimum income guarantee promise right here on BloombergQuint. Praveen, I want to thank you for that. Of course, Madhavan, Narayanan and Aditi Phadnis.